the Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Happy Scientist podcast. This, of course, is the place to be if you want to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist. I'm Nick Oswald, the founder of Bitesize Bio, and today we will be drawing again on the wisdom of Mr. Kenneth Vogt. Ken is my friend, mentor, the Bitesize Bio team coach, and the founder of the executive mentoring company, Vera Claritas. Today, and in all other Happy Scientist podcast episodes, you get to benefit from his words of wisdom to help you to increase your performance, enjoyment, and success in the lab. In this episode, we'll be discussing that voice inside your head. You know the one that always has something to say, always thinks it knows best, and is your worst critic. So without further ado, Ken, let's talk about that voice in your head.
All right. Let's talk about that voice in your head. So, first off, I want to start with a disclaimer. I am not a psychotherapist. I am not an attorney. I am not a public accountant. I am not your bartender. That's not what this is about, folks. If you truly are having trouble with voices in your head, by all means, seek some counseling. But I'm talking about what all of us encounter. We all have a voice in your head. In fact, we all probably have multiple voices in our heads that are talking to us all day long, and they just never stop. It's just constantly there. Now, in some fashion, it's very useful and very comforting. It's familiar. You know, we know what this voice is going to say in certain situations. And if we have more than one voice, we may have voices in our head from people that have been very influential to us. So we may hear our mother say things to us, or our favorite teacher from the past, or a trusted confidant. It's possible too you can have voices that are not favorable. They're from some bully on the playground or some abuser that's been in our life. That can happen too, but for the most part today, we're going to talk about the positive voice, the voice that is your constant companion and is there trying to help. It's there to keep you safe. It's there to keep you alive. It's there to make things turn out well for you, at least from its perspective. And so you're familiar with those thoughts that this is the voice that tells you, like, you're not going to go get that second donut now, are you? Oh, yeah, okay. That voice is useful. It's like, no, I'm not having a third cup of coffee. I'm feeling wired already. We're going to stop now. And that voice will often speak to you as you. So it's not going to say you shouldn't have a third cup of coffee. It's going to say I shouldn't have a third cup of coffee. There's a connection there that it can become very personal to us, and we can very much identify with this voice. Okay, but what this voice is doing, since it doesn't have any other means to speak to us, it doesn't have a mouth to speak with. It's just a thought. So we're going to talk about thoughts and what happens when you have thoughts, and where do they come from, and are they mine, or did they come from somewhere else? Do I have to take ownership of them because I thought it? And are these thoughts me? Are they the quintessential essence of who I am? So I want to start off with an Oxford Dictionary definition of thought. Their definition is an idea or opinion produced by thinking or occurring suddenly in the mind. I thought that "or" was very telling, because a thought is something you think. Well, duh, yeah, these are coming from the same root word. but something that occurs suddenly in your mind. Isn't that interesting? And if you think about most thoughts, that is exactly what happens. You don't sit down to think a thought and then produce something. This is generally speaking, thoughts just kind of arrive, and they arrive in your mind. So that leads to the second definition we need to give. What does the Oxford Dictionary think about mind? It says, it is the element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experience, to think and to feel. So that again, if you just think, if your mind is just a repository for your thinking, that's one thing. But if it's a place for you to become aware of everything around you, to be aware of your experiences, to think and to feel, now it's much broader context. And that is the environment in which thoughts arrive. And thoughts arrive in many different ways. They may arrive as language. And, we often, when we think about the voice in our head, we're thinking about the words it's speaking. But not all thoughts come as language. Thoughts can come as sounds or that are not words. Or they can come as pictures. Or they can come as feelings, as forebodings or anticipations of things. There's all kinds of ways to have that voice in your head reach out to you and to give you information, and it's useful. It's very useful. If you didn't have that going on, you would by definition be unconscious. And what good is that? Not going to get much done there. And the fact is, we spend a third of our life unconscious as it is, so the 2/3 that we're supposed to be awake, we kind of want to make use of. So here we've established that thoughts is a pretty broad category of things that we experience in our mind. But it does lead to a question, like, where do these thoughts come from? And if you ponder how thoughts come to you, if you consider that, you're going to realize that generally speaking, they just arrive. Now, granted, sometimes they are triggered by something. They might be a response to an event. But the fact is, often thoughts arrive totally unbidden. We didn't ask for this thought, and often we're not ready for it, or not real happy that it's there. If you have a thought that I look ugly today, that just comes to you out of nowhere, that's not a welcome thought. I don't want to hear that. But on the other hand, maybe it's just a not very politically correct way of saying, you could do a little better dressing or combing your hair or or getting a better shave today. These thoughts can still be useful, even though they just show up like that. And we may look at that, well, how did that happen? Why did I take notice that today I need to pay more attention to my physical appearance? Well, there could be all kinds of triggers for that, but these thoughts are not coming because I made the decision today to be more aware of my physical appearance, and so then, therefore, I had a thought to be more aware of my physical appearance. It's not really how it works. And that's not our experience, and it's not just one person's experience. This is this isn't a unique experience. This is the common human experience, that thoughts just arrive. Now, I can feel some of you out there bristling at this, because you've put a lot of importance behind the fact that you have produced a lot of thinking, and it's been very important in your life. And in fact, you can point to some sheepskins on the wall that prove that you were the originator of your thoughts. But I want to posit to you that they don't prove that. So if you don't believe me, let's do a little experiment. I'm going to say something, and then I want you to create a thought in response. So, you ready? You ready, Nick? Okay. 2 plus 2 equals...
4.
You had a thought, and it was 4, right?
I did think
I mean,
5, but that was just the contrarian.
Well, sure. But, okay, what process did you use to create the thought 4?
None. It just appeared.
It just appeared. Now, why? Why that? Why 4 and why not 5? Why not? And possibly for some of you, the answer came to you in another language because, that'd be a more familiar language to you. But it was still good. But I will be willing to bet that it was still translatable into the English word 4. Well, because 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is information you already have. And you might think, well, I just pulled that out of my memory banks. It's like, did you really, though? Was there some filing system that you rifled through until you got to 2 plus 2 equals? Did you have to really do any looking around to find that answer? It's like, no, it was right there. And frankly, that kind of thing happens to you all the time. You get asked questions to which there are ready answers, and they just produce themselves. Now, sometimes they're ready answers like this one. It's like, man, I learned that in first grade or even before. But others are things that are more complicated, and yet you have this inkling just comes to you. And sometimes we'll label those things. We'll call them hunches or epiphanies, which are a little different than a calculation, like a math calculation. But they're all different, and yet they all kind of show up the same way. We recognize that when you have a hunch or an epiphany, that's definitely wasn't me thinking it up. That was me. I stumbled across something. Well, how is it really any different than stumbling across 2 plus 2 equals 4? Yeah, it's just another thing that is true in the world that can be found. Now, I want to grant you too, you can find some things that are untrue also, but for now, we'll stick to the things that are factually accurate. So you're really not thinking up your thoughts, and you think, well, how much effort do you put into thinking things up? If you've ever tried to sit down and write a term paper, and you just hit the wall, then you realize I can't create this on purpose. I have to get into a mode where it flows, and that flowing is coming from something a little bigger than the apparatus that is parked between our ears. Now I'm not going to launch into anything about consciousness or awareness. Although
pretty deep.
Yeah, I mean it can. But there's certainly a scientific basis for having confidence in mindfulness. Mindfulness is just is about focus. So when you focus on the right things, then thoughts come to you. And the better job you do at focusing, the more accurate those thoughts tend to be. And so that's your job in this, is to focus. Your job is to put your awareness on the task at hand, what's in front of you. And sometimes we don't want to hear the thoughts that are in our head, because we're getting thoughts that aren't very nice. You're stupid, you're mean, you're selfish, you're lazy. Who wants to hear that kind of stuff? But if the voice in your own head is telling you those things, there's probably some factual data behind it. Now, that's not to say that it's entirely accurate. If something's telling you that you're stupid and you're ugly, that's probably not true. Not entirely. But there may be some things there that it's signaling you, like, you know what? You're not stupid, but you're acting stupid in this situation because you know better. Okay, well, now that's a much more nuanced thought, but that's something you're gonna have to put a little more focus on to get. Otherwise, all you're gonna hear is stupid, stupid, stupid. And that's not going to be as useful to you. If you want your thoughts to be useful, then it comes around to putting some focus on it. So now there's another thing about thoughts that's interesting. That have you ever had a thought and thought that's my thought? And we've done that. We said, well, I think X, and so it becomes very valuable to us now because it's ours, because we've taken ownership of it, and that ownership becomes very important to us. And in fact, this discussion so far, we've talked about how thoughts are often just arising, can be very disturbing to people. Like, are you saying I don't have any of my own thoughts? What am I doing? I'm just wandering around here as a receptacle for these thoughts that are careening in from God knows where. That can sound very disturbing to people. But the point is that you do get to choose your own thoughts, and there are times that we have thoughts and we reject them. We've all had that happen. So you look at something and you go, oh, I think I'm gonna burn the meatloaf tonight. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not gonna do that. Just because you had a thought doesn't mean you have to take ownership of it. You can accept thoughts and you can reject thoughts, and you have a choice. And you can reject thoughts after the fact. Just because you've accepted a thought doesn't mean you have to stay that way. It doesn't matter how long you've been accepting that thought. If for the longest time you've told yourself you're not good at math, at some point you can stop and say, you know what, I'm going to stop saying that because it's not true. I had that experience when I was a kid. I remember in grade school, all these kids complaining about how hard math was. Math is so hard. And of course, I'm in third grade, whatever. I'm an 8-year-old. I want to fit into everybody. And I'm like, yeah, math is hard. And then one day I realized, I don't think math is hard. Why am I agreeing with this? And I just stopped. And from that point, I've loved math ever since. And I realized for many of you, the idea of loving math sounds like an absolute impossibility. But you have to understand, from my standpoint there at 8 years old, everybody I knew told me math was hard. Why wouldn't I believe these people? I trusted them. They seemed like good folks. Granted, they were all 8 years old, but what do they know? But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't have that distinction. But it was enough that I could choose to reject a thought, and I did, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And I'll bet you that you have an example or 2 or 10 of those in your own life. You do know how to reject thoughts if they're not useful to you. And you can reject thoughts that you've had for a long time. I think a lot of teenagers have that happen. They get to a point where they realize that, you know what? I'm not a kid anymore. I can look at the world differently. And the same thing happens with young adults. There's a process that happens there. So, if you're in your 20s, just because you've always been X doesn't mean you have to stay that way. You are still quite malleable. And for those of you who are older, I will grant you that it is a little harder to change when you're older, but it is not impossible. And maintaining your flexibility is very important as you go on. I was thinking about, there's a couple different articles. I'm gonna have to dig them up and put them in the show notes. One has to do with this idea of the thoughts that come into your head, and I'll find that for you. But then another is about the patterns that we have in life. And when you're young, you need to develop patterns. Otherwise, life is just constant chaos. So you develop a pattern for, how to put your pants on. You develop a pattern for how to pour a bowl of cereal. And now that you're older, you think, well, that's silly. Why would I need a pattern for that? When you didn't have one, it wasn't silly at all. So you go through your life and you develop patterns, and then you start seeing some real benefits. You start developing patterns, say on the soccer field, and you get really good at it. And people start to notice you for that. And they're like, oh, this is great. And you start to see the benefits of developing patterns. So you develop patterns that you do all your homework and you study before a test. And it pays off for you. Well, as you get older, you get to the point where you've got so many patterns stacked up in your brain, they're constantly taking over your thinking. These patterns will keep firing thoughts into your head. And while that is useful to a point, there is a point where you don't have time for any internal dialogue anymore, where you don't have time to develop any more patterns. In fact, you probably have patterns for developing patterns as you get older. And so your job as you get older is actually to start discarding patterns that are no longer serving you. And you'll know they're no longer serving you because they will keep generating thoughts that you have to reject. When you find yourself constantly going, no, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to think that way, I'm not going to be that way, well, then you realize, okay, there's a pattern here that's got to go. And that pattern has been pushing thoughts at you. So there's a lot of things that happen to you in your life, and now they are the thought generators. Because, I never want to be in that situation again. And so it's going to try and protect you from that. And a lot of these voices, a lot of these thoughts that come to you are your ego trying to protect you. It's trying to keep you safe. And we live in a world where people are so concerned about safety. They want to have safe zones and all that. And the fact is, if you think about how your life has been, it's the times you weren't safe when you grew the most, when you got the most done, when you learned the most. Now, I'll grant you, there are times when you're not safe that hurt the most, but you learn a lot from those times too. So, you still have a choice then of what you're going to do with these thoughts that come to you. So the final point I want to, I say the final point, one of the last points I want to make is that this voice in your head is not you. I'll put it to you this way. When you were young, you probably figured out at some point that I am not my body. You realize you have a body, but you are not your body. And there's simple ways to know that. If you were to lose an arm, would you stop being you? Well, no, you'd still be you. How about if you lost an eye? Would you still be you? Well, yeah, you'd still be you. What if you lost an eye and an arm and both legs? You'd still be you. We can start chopping parts off your body. Unless we take your head off, where you can't keep living, you're still going to be you. So you are not your body, but that you possess a body. And that body is a vehicle for you. And it's a very useful vehicle. And it's great. It's a good thing you have one. And maybe it's got some flaws, or maybe it's got some limitations, or maybe it's not as good as at some things as you wish it was. But at the end of the day, you can't get hung up on the fact that you are not, a star athlete if you're not. Or you can't get hung up on the fact that somebody else is a better musician than you, or somebody else knows more about a topic than you. They're better at something. They can do something that you can't do. Because it's just what your body can do. So, I kind of leaked this in here. You start to realize, well, having a body is kind of the same as having a mind. You are not your mind. You have a mind. And so, just as you realize that my body is not me, you can realize your mind is not you. It's a tool that you use. And you are something greater than that. And so you're a possessor of a body and a mind. And so these thoughts that are coming through, they're definitely not you. They are things that are housed in this mind that is just a tool of yours. So it's like if you had a computer program that could generate speech, as an example, or text. Would you think that text was the computer? No, it's just the software running, on the computer, and it's the same thing here. So these thoughts are just the software running on your mind, in your mind, and it's useful. It's greatly useful, but it is also very important that you realize you are not your mind and you are not your thoughts, because you can get very pathed into this and become very limited. If you want freedom, you're going to realize, I'm going to treat this thing as a tool in my possession, under my control, under my charge, and then I'll be free to do what I want to do. And And I'm not advocating, crazy freedom here, but I'm talking about where you're not going to be unnecessarily shackled by your thoughts, because you may have some disquieting thoughts at times. You may have times when you're depressed. You may have times when you're angry. You may have times when you feel despondent or unloved or all kinds of negative things. But none of those things represent you. You can realize, that's just something happening around me. It's not even necessarily happening to you, because you can take a look at it and realize that, I don't have to accept that as a personal attack. That thought that said that you're unlovable wasn't real, and it wasn't right. I mean, it wasn't correct, it wasn't accurate. It's just a thought that came by. And so the question you have then is, okay, well, how do we use this voice to get the most benefit for ourselves? So I want to start off by pointing out that silence cannot be overrated. This voice in our head just keeps going and going and going and going, and we're so accustomed to it that we're not even bothered by it. But it can be turned off, or at least turned down to where it's no longer registering with you. And there are ways to do that. And again, I won't dive too deep into all that, but just simple sitting back and just quieting your mind. Now, you can take that to the nth degree. You can become a master meditator if you want, but you don't have to go to that route. If you could just take a moment and take a breath, just literally focus on your breath for a second. Just focus on your breathing, and not have to constantly deal with your thoughts. You're going to find out that everything gets easier and things get clearer. Now, I want to target something that Nick and I were talking about here recently. So I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, Nick. But so here it goes. I'm going to make a statement here. Worry never helps. Now, having made that statement, Nick, why have you ever felt that worry might be important or valuable in your life?
Okay, yeah, this is something we talked about recently, is that I felt like for certain things, it was my responsibility to feel worried about it so that I would do something about it.
Right. And so worry, of course, comes as thoughts. And so to feel responsible, you needed to hear those thoughts about, oh, this could really go south on me if I don't get in front of this, and if I don't work really hard, and if I don't spend a lot of money, or whatever other commitment you have to make to it. And if you don't do that, well, I'm being irresponsible. And now you got the voice telling you that you're going to be irresponsible. I thought you were an adult. I thought you were a grown-up, but I guess not. I guess you're just a selfish little kid again. And you never took on the mantle of responsibility. These are the kind of voices that can really be dragging you down. So if you can have a moment of silence, of a little freedom from that, it would be awesome. So I'll give you something simple that you can do with thoughts like that, whatever thought it is. Now, you can get into a whole cycle of stuff where you have a thought that says you're being irresponsible. And then you have the next thought that counters that, saying, come on, you're being really hard on yourself here. And, so there's this cycle going on of you're having a thought, and now you're bad for having the thought. Now you're bad for daring to counter the thought. And, it could just be a cacophony of noise that doesn't do you any good. So what do you do when you have a thought that you prefer to not have? How do you deal with that? Well, and here's the answer. When you have that thought, rather than argue with it, rather than deny it, rather than call it stupid or selfish or unreasoning or whatever negative you want to call it, how about you just receive it and say to it, thank you for sharing. So when you have a thought that says, you look fat in that dress, thank you for sharing. That's it. We're not, and you've got to be open to the idea that, like, you really have to be thankful. Okay, thank you for offering that opinion. I'm glad I heard it. But you don't have to validate it. You're not saying that now it's right, it's correct, and I have to do something about it. No, all this voice in your head that wants is to keep you safe. So all it really wants is to be heard. You don't even actually have to act on it. It doesn't even care that you take action. What it cares is that you're listening. So when you say to it, thank you for sharing, it feels heard. And what happens when somebody is heard? Well, they stop talking. Well, if you heard me, I don't need to say it again. And we'll notice that's what happens too. When you don't acknowledge a thought, you will keep hearing over and over again, I should have went to bed earlier. 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 It'll never stop until you acknowledge it and give it that thank you for sharing. Now, there are other thoughts that are truly beneficial. Things that are like, man, they're life-saving. It's like, man, that is a great idea. Oh, I'm so glad that you remembered that I'm supposed to pick up the milk on the way home. Great. Reward those beneficial thoughts. Be grateful for them. It's like, wow, man, I'm so glad I thought of that. And give yourself that moment to feel that little pleasure, that little joy, that, oh, good, I'm thinking, and I'm thinking usefully. Because for those who are listening to this podcast, if you got as far as you've gotten in the field that you've gotten in, I imagine that you're somebody that thinks a lot. And you've probably noticed that there are people around you that don't think so often and don't think so deep. Now, that may not be among your colleagues. They're probably peers of yours in that regard. But other people in life, and it might be people in your family, even your friends, people you grew up with, and you might have looked at that and said, what is wrong with them? Why don't they think? Why do they keep getting into the problems they keep getting into? I can see them a mile away because my brain's turned on, So I'm not denigrating the idea that thinking's going on. Thinking is very useful. But by the same token, silence is useful too. So, now people where their mind is being silent all the time, I don't know. I mean, silent all the time in that they're not thinking anything useful. All they're thinking about is the baseball scores or the latest cartoons. Okay, that's not that helpful. But somebody whose mind is truly silent, those people are rare, and they're amazing. And when they have thoughts, they ring like a bell because they happen without any other distractions. Because sometimes you have thoughts that are competing in your head at the same time, and you wonder why you can't focus because, I gotta cut the grass when I get home, and before that I gotta go to the store. Well, before that, I think I heard the car making a funny noise, and I gotta get this report done. And did we figure out how we're gonna do that protocol for this next round of experiments? And oh man, there's a meeting tomorrow, and I'm not even close to ready. And all that's going on at once in your head, and you're never gonna get anywhere with it. So. So what I'm trying to offer to you is the idea is that if you will give your thoughts a little bit of attention, at least to thank them for being there, it's kind of a carrot that you offer to them. And so they'll stop constantly shouting the same things over and over again. Now you might think that, well, if we're going to have carrot, we should have stick too. It's like, well, not necessarily. If you're negative with yourself, it comes at a cost. And there's nothing you can do with a stick. If you beat yourself about the things you think up, they're going to still stick around. Because again, they're still trying to get a message through to you. And when you stop it down, what you're doing is you're going to make it give you the most simplistic message ever. Because it's like, well, this you can't hear it unless I make it simple, and it's got to be short. And so that's when you're going to get your brain yelling at you. And it's just going to call you names, and you're not going to get as much use out of it. But if you really want to make use of all these beautiful thoughts that come by, and to be more aware when great new ideas come by and epiphanies come by and hunches that lead you in the right direction and save you a lot of time and trouble. This is the way to do it. Give your mind some respect. Don't, we love to denigrate that. Oh, I got voices in my head. It's like, yeah, you do, and it's great, and it's useful, and they're there to help. So, this is what the thoughts in your head are all about.
Wow. Okay, I just let you go there because that was a stream, but I was writing some notes down, and it's quite interesting. It's that whole thing about thinking that, picking apart what is you is quite an interesting exercise, isn't it? A little bit mind-blowing. Well, literally mind-blowing sometimes. A couple of things I wrote down from what you said there was, you think of, you're not your body, you're not your mind, but you, whatever you are getting feedback all the time from your body and your mind. So these are kind of like components, if you like. If you're the central processing unit or whatever, these are the components that are feeding back to you. And in the case of the body, it's, there's all sorts of stuff feeding back, but feeling, you're feeling things, your, senses and whatnot. And your thoughts are your mind is feeding back thoughts to you all the time, sometimes spontaneously or apparently spontaneously, and sometimes in response to things that you've put to it, like you ask a question of a calculator sort of thing. And so a couple of things that occurred to me from what you said there was that you mentioned being, or you alluded to being in the zone. If you wanted to focus on to do something well, you get into the zone, or you can get into the zone by if you want to focus on, concentrate on writing the essay you were mentioning, you have to get in the zone to be able to do that, and that's clearing your mind enough to be able to take control of the thought process or control of what you're asking your brain to give you back in order to be able to write the essay. And likewise, you mentioned being mindful, and then also silence, being able to sit in silence. And that is separating yourself from the thoughts so that you're back to you, and then back to who you are, if you like, or what you are rather. And then at that point, you're more able to use the mind in the way that you want to use it as a component. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Something you've alluded to there too, it's worth saying out loud, is when I say thoughts, I'm speaking very broadly, and sometimes people make a distinction between a thought and a feeling. But here's an interesting way to think of this, to consider this. A thought is something you have in your mind. A feeling is something you have in your body. And so one's not better or worse than the other. And I know that sometimes there's a masculine feminine thing about how the masculine thinks and the feminine feels, and both sides will denigrate the other side for that. There's nothing to denigrate there. They're both useful, and they're both fall into the same category of thoughts that we're talking about today.
Okay, and so that's a good clarification. So you are talking about being back in the mindful place or in the zone to write your essay. At that point, you are centered in yourself, and you are using your mind in, to write the essay. Or if you're in the zone to take a kick in football, of whatever persuasion of football you want to take, you're in the zone. You're in the optimal position to take the kick, when you come back into the zone, because you've taken control of your body. You've taken mindful control of your body, which is what mindfulness really is.
Yeah.
So as well, we've all experienced where those inputs, and especially the spontaneous inputs or the apparently spontaneous inputs, are overwhelm us and stop us from performing. We have feelings, we have thoughts that are overwhelming. It's just too much, whether it's worry thoughts or it's chronic down on myself, or life is no good thoughts, or, oh, I can't do this type thoughts, or aches and pains in the body, or feelings, or whatever it is, and they overwhelm you, so that then they feel like that's you. I am fearful, I'm, whatever, because you take identity of those thoughts. And so your way, one way to kind of overcome that issue is to, as you mentioned in previous episodes, is to practice mindfulness, so you get used to being able to step back into you and see the thoughts and feelings as inputs for that they are. Sure. The other thing you're talking about it today, just to summarize, is to when a thought is offered to you by your brain, is to get into the habit of just whatever it is use the carrot to kind of just appease it. It's like a child coming to you with a thought. You don't have to act on it, you don't have to believe it, but you thank it for the thought, and that stops you from fighting against it and creating a loop where that's just going to take up more and more space. Exactly. Then the other one is that when you have useful thoughts, then be especially grateful for those, and then you start training yourself into having more useful thoughts, and so that you become, by in one way practicing mindfulness to separate yourself from your thoughts or your awareness, so that you're aware of the difference between you and your thoughts, and then on the other hand, training your thoughts to be more beneficial by by not fighting with the ones that you don't want, and by being especially grateful for the ones that are useful. Then you start to create a situation where your thoughts are more beneficial, but you're also not overwhelmed by them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sounds like you were listening today.
Oh yeah, I wrote this down because it's kind of, this is something that I always kind of get tripped up on with this, what is you thing, what are you? And that can, who knows, that.
Yeah, it's a profound question.
It's a very profound question, but for a practical solution, you're not your worry. This is why you say that worrying isn't useful. Worrying is just your brain popping out solutions to you all the time, and that generally won't do. It does it even when you don't need it. So by definition, it's not. You have to filter that, and you have to take control of that. Yeah. Okay. So it's a good explanation of why meditation, mindfulness, and stuff like that works, because it separates. It's a good example of why, or a good illustration of why doing things like being aware of the thoughts that are passing from your mind into you. Being aware of those helps, and also it's it's also a good illustration of how, when we get overwhelmed, when we get overwhelmed by our thoughts, and we don't use these things to filter them, or to corral them, or to do, not corral them, but to to allow them to just come and go. We get them caught. We get caught up in them. How that can cause us big problems.
Yeah, well, that's a great metaphor there. The idea of, are they caught? If something's caught, now it's trapped there. Well, can't it just go by? Even if it's something useful, it doesn't have to stick around. It can give you an idea for something useful, and you can recall it later. It doesn't have to be put into practice in this moment. You have some freedom there. So, remember this whole apparatus of a mind is there to serve you. It's a servant to you. It's not your master. So, you don't have to do everything it tells you.
Yeah, it's a bit more of an advanced magic 8-ball.
Exactly.
So would you believe? Yeah, sometimes it's right, sometimes it isn't.
Yeah.
So if you had a magic 8-ball that was going crazy and just firing the different saying whatever it is, the different one-liners at you, whatever that thing does. I can't remember what it tells you, but would you necessarily, would you be selective about what you let kind of get to you, or would you just believe everything, you know? It definitely does take a bit of self-examination and stuff, but I think that was a really great sort of bit of insight for people to start. Well, maybe they already do look at it from themselves. If they do, then it gives maybe a bit of a clarification in some areas. But if people have never looked at this, then I find it certainly a very helpful thing to look at.
Yeah, it's very, very practical. I mean, obviously, we could go down some rabbit holes here, which might be interesting and fun to do. But, you know, for the purpose of this podcast, we're trying to give you practical things that you can use that will help advance your career and help you become a better scientist. And when I say better scientist, I mean somebody who actually accomplishes more good in the field of science for the benefit of mankind. That's a pretty high aspiration there, but that's what we want for you.
I mean, again, we can make this podcast. We make this about scientists because this is, you know, Bitesize Bio caters for a scientific audience, and I have a particular interest in science, and so we make it for that. You could easily make it for, you know, be a happier ball player or a happier lawyer or a happier doctor, and again, in this particular instance, what we're talking about is something that's actually well known, especially in sports, but everywhere as well. It's about how do you get into the zone, and getting into the zone is separating from the thoughts that are saying, I can't do this, or controlling the thoughts that, you know, you're trying to hit the kick. Of course, if you train your thoughts to be that you're clear, and that at the very least your mind is neutral, and at the very and better that it's thinking a positive pattern towards that you're going to make this kick, right? Then you're more likely to be A, happier, and B, get the results you want. But it's the same in science as well.
Exactly. It's about top performance. Yeah.
So yeah, that was very good. I love it when you do that, and it's just that it just captures it and is so clear. I might draw that little diagram that I wrote. This seems to be a theme that's happening as well. Like, I'm going to draw this diagram out that I just wrote in my notes when you were talking, and it actually helped me, so it might help other people as well. So
sounds good.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Okay.
So thank you, Ken, again for another very eye-opening podcast. I have to now get back into the zone to think about what I'm. So again, if you want to see the diagram, that we will put that in the show notes, and the outline of Ken's outline of the episode, we'll put that in the show notes, which you can find at bitesizebio.com/the happy scientist. This is, I believe, is episode 42.
Wow.
Would you believe? And
yeah, it's the answer to life and everything, according to Hitchhiker's of the Galaxy.
Wow, that's a good one, actually, because this is very fundamental, this one. And if you have anything if you would like to get involved in conversation with us, ask us questions, just say hi, you can find us at facebook.com/the Happy Scientist Club. And I think that leaves us just to say again, thanks, Ken, for that, and for the work you put into creating that. And we'll see you again in the next episode.
Very good. Bye.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.